everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. What I want to go ahead and do, just take a few minutes, and I want to go ahead and talk about the big conversation in college football as of this moment, about 8:30 Eastern time, as I'm talking here, as I'm recording here, and that is, what the heck is the College Football Playoff Committee about to do? I'm actually headed in here momentarily to go do Fox Sports Radio's National College Football Postgame Show, 11 p.m. Eastern time, so make sure to tune in. But as I record here, 3 of the 5 Power 5 conference championships are complete. Washington won the Pac-12 championship on late Friday night. Congrats to them. I think just about everybody had Oregon, and I think with that win, I know with that win, Washington has clinched a college football playoff berth. Saturday afternoon, Texas beats Oklahoma State in convincing fashion in the Big 12 championship game. We think Texas is probably in. We're going to discuss that momentarily. But just moments ago, Alabama claimed the SEC championship, beating Georgia. First time Georgia has lost since they lost in this game, 2 years ago to the Alabama Crimson Tide. So congratulations to Alabama, your 2023 SEC champs. Of course, with Alabama winning, that sets up the very fascinating conversation of what the College Football Playoff Committee is going to do. Now, admittedly, I'm recording here, talking here right in the middle of, or right at the start of the Big Ten Championship, Michigan and Iowa, the ACC Championship, Florida State and Louisville. And so this might get easy if Louisville does beat Florida State. And if that happens, then Alabama almost certainly is in. There's basically no scenario where they would be out. I bring it up, though, because it is the big topical conversation of the moment. If Florida State wins, who deserves that 4th playoff spot? Is it, assuming that Michigan's in, Washington's in, we're assuming Michigan's going to beat Iowa, and assuming that Texas with the head-to-head win over Alabama would get in, who deserves that 4th spot? An undefeated Florida State team that is without their starting quarterback, maybe their backup quarterback, or the Alabama Crimson Tide SEC champs? That's right. Is it possible the SEC champion will be left out of the final 4-team college football playoff spot, college football playoff, etc.? So let's dive in. Let's talk about, let me start by saying this. First of all, before we even get into it, I want to go ahead and take a moment. Like we're going to spend the next 12, 14 hours arguing over the college football playoff. It shouldn't take away from the fact that Alabama is a very, very worthy SEC champ, and they deserve this moment, and their fan base deserves this moment to appreciate everything this team has accomplished this year. I've said it really since about week 6, week 7. I believe this is Nick Saban's best coaching job ever since he's gotten Alabama. Maybe at Toledo or wherever he started, he was better, maybe LSU, whatever. But I've watched that basically every game of his entire Alabama tenure, and I bring it up because I believe that I would argue that this is his best coaching job. Because you go back to that Texas game when the O-line couldn't block, when the receivers couldn't separate, when Jalen Milroe was struggling to pass the ball, and you go to even the following week against South Florida. Remember, that South Florida game, I think, was one of the darkest moments of the entire Saban regime in Alabama. Remember, Jalen Milroe gets benched. Who knows what the real reason was? Tyler Buckner comes in. He can't play. Ty Simpson comes in. He's all right. But they barely survive against South Florida. And I'll be honest, I was like everybody else that said this team isn't good enough. But they went back to Jalen Milroe every single week since then. They've gotten better. Open up SEC play against Ole Miss. 24-10 win there. Dominant defensive effort after the first quarter. I think Ole Miss scored on the opening possession of the game a touchdown and only had a field goal after that. From there, a few weeks later, they go to Texas A&M. Take care of business against A&M. Fall down early, rally, win the game. Tennessee a week later. How about Tennessee? They were down, 24-3, whatever it was. They were down by a lot. They rallied to win that one. They beat LSU. And then, of course, that Iron Bowl win, 4th and 31, will live on in infamy, especially, by the way, if they go on to playoff and could potentially win a national championship, it will be because of the 4th and 31. So I want to go ahead and give this Alabama team credit for getting better every single moment, every single week of this season, which ultimately culminated with that SEC championship on Saturday. Listen, I know Georgia fans are going to sit here and say, it's all the refs' fault, blame the refs, do this, do that. I disagree. I know that the stats were pretty even. I know that there was that very questionable catch right before the half that was not reviewed. But listen, it just felt like in the big moments, Alabama made the big plays, including, by the way, that conversion late in the game by Jalen Milroe. Felt like Georgia did not make the big plays in the big moments. Obviously the big turnover in the third quarter there. And I'll be honest, I thought for about 3/4 of that game, maybe 60%, first half into the second half, I thought Kirby Smart coach scared like it was 2017, 2018, 2019 all over again. And so you can blame that. Alabama made the plays when they won, and they are the deserving SEC champ. So with it now becomes the fascinating question of the moment. Does Alabama deserve a college football playoff berth? Well, they certainly deserve a college football playoff berth, but maybe the better question is, will they get one as all this shakes out? Again, to be clear, we're recording in real time as Michigan plays Iowa and as Florida State plays Louisville. If we assume Washington is in, I think Michigan is probably going to take care of Iowa, although I think that's kind of an interesting conversation. Everyone's talking, and I said this on the Aaron Torres pod earlier in the week, like everyone's talking about the SEC being left out. If Michigan were to lose this game, are we sure? Like I don't know. I'm just asking. I think if Michigan loses and Florida State wins, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that the Big Ten gets in. But let's say Michigan wins, and let's say Florida State wins and wins the ACC championship. The question becomes, does Alabama deserve a spot in the playoff? And so I want to jump in, and I want to look at it from all angles because I think it's a fascinating conversation. First off, let me start by saying this. Michigan, Washington, if Michigan wins, they're in, Washington isn't. I truly believe, and I said this on Wednesday's show, if Texas were to win on Saturday, they will not be left out even if Alabama wins. I believed it then. I believe it now. One, Texas absolutely looked the part on Saturday afternoon of one of the 4 best teams in college football. They look like the team that went to Tuscaloosa and won. They look like a team that could beat Alabama on a neutral field, Michigan on a neutral field, whatever. But beyond that, I thought it was interesting that the committee kept always keeping them ahead of Alabama throughout this process. Because for people who want Alabama to jump Texas, I just don't see it. I just don't see the committee for week after week after week after week after week putting Texas one spot ahead of Alabama, clearly valuing the head-to-head win, and then all of a sudden deciding on the final week at Texas, you got to go. I don't see that, again, because Texas looked the part. If you want to argue resume, here's the thing. Texas had the inferior resume a week ago, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, but they had the head-to-head win. So I think Texas gets in, and now it comes down to Florida State winning against Louisville or Alabama. And I think it ultimately comes down to, obviously, what do they value? What does the committee value? Do they value, do they value what the kind of the proverbial resume? Do they, the proverbial best team? What do they value in their final team? If it's Florida State, it is kind of that deserving category, right? Because it's interesting. Like it's one, and I've said this on the show all week. I am genuinely torn on how I feel about Florida State. I am genuinely torn on how I feel about Florida State. Because on the one hand, I am a guy that says, settle it on the field. And if you take care of business, if you beat everybody on your schedule as a power conference champion, it's hard to say that they don't deserve to be in. It's not like they played nobody either, by the way. One at Clemson. I know Clemson's not great. That was still a great win. They destroyed LSU, 31 straight points against LSU when both teams were at full strength. Obviously, in this scenario, they beat Louisville. Okay. Like that's not a great resume, but at 13-0, you win every game you play. Everybody deals with injuries. It's hard for me to sit there and say they don't deserve to be in. But at the same time, I can also say this. I watched them against Florida. It was an abomination. They were awful. And I know it was on the road, swamp, whatever, blah, blah. What I'm here to tell you, though, is this. Like, Florida was playing with a backup quarterback, too. And Florida's terrible. And Florida State, 224 yards of total offense, 134 yards passing. They were not very good. So does the committee value Florida State's resume? Do they value the fact that they're undefeated? Or do they look at the fact that, let's be honest, Florida State, I don't think even Florida State fans would argue they're one of the 4 best teams in college football. They would argue they're one of the 4 most deserving. They're not one of the 4 best. They want to be favored against any team that could potentially make the playoff, whether it's Texas, Michigan, Washington, Alabama. Wouldn't be favored against Ohio State. Wouldn't be favored against whoever, Oregon. Not without Jordan Travis, they wouldn't be. And so you look at that part of it. You look at the fact that every team in the playoff would be praying that they get matched up with Florida State. And it's hard to argue that they're in. If it's about the most, if it's about the best as opposed to the most deserving, then yeah, it is. It should be Alabama. Because Alabama, as I said, they're getting better every week. Give Nick Saban another 5 weeks with this team. Whew, buddy, maybe not 5, 4, 3, whatever it ends up being. I'm here to tell you they're going to be even better 2-3 weeks from now, especially as they would get healthy. You talk about a team, who would you rather play? An Alabama coming off an SEC championship game win over Georgia, or Florida State without their starting quarterback? I think we both know the answer. One thing that I do think the committee, I don't want to say they'll consider, but this is something I don't think enough people have talked about. I do think the word precedent is very interesting in this specific case, in this specific year, okay? As I wrap up this segment, I'm here to tell you what stands out to me. The committee in years past, I think they've been afraid to set new precedents, okay? There's been years where there's a 2-loss SEC, runner-up type team. Remember, one year it was Oklahoma as a Big 12 champ against a 2-loss Georgia. They didn't set the precedent of leaving out the conference champion. Obviously, last year, Ohio State 1 loss, Alabama 2 regular season losses. They decided to take Ohio State instead. By the way, TCU, remember, TCU didn't win their conference championship. So it was a 1-loss TCU versus a 2-loss Bama. They took the 1-loss team. So they prefer conference champions. They prefer head-to-head wins, which Texas has. That's why I think they're good. And I don't know that they love breaking precedent, which would give advantage to Florida State. But here's the thing that I keep talking about. Does precedent really matter in a year where we're going from 4 teams to 12 teams in the playoff? Because think about that, right? If this was 2019 and we didn't have the 12-team playoff coming, I don't think the committee wants to do the thing where they put all future committees under fire by leaving out the undefeated power conference champion. But this year, who really cares, right? Because guess what? Next year, basically every major conference champion is getting in. And there's going to be 7 at-large bids. So you can sneak Florida State in there somewhere next year, along with Alabama, along with Ohio State. Alabama would actually have an automatic bid because they'd be a conference champion, along with Oregon, Ohio State, whoever. So I'm just bringing it up to say that is the scenario that I think has to be discussed. No, you don't want to set precedent, but in this case, who really cares? Precedent goes out the window tomorrow, because once those 4 teams are announced, there will never be a 4-team college football playoff again, and never a committee meeting on all 4. So we'll see what happens. I will guess right now, if Florida State wins, but it's ugly, I predict Alabama gets in because of that reason. The precedent, the fact that you can throw precedent out the window. But I'm for, listen, there's only 12, whatever it is, people on that committee that know what the ultimate decision will be. But I think it'd probably be Alabama because, again, part of it is best team, SEC champion. I don't buy the whole, you can't leave the SEC out. It's about money. No. The committee has many times left out worthy SEC teams over Big 12 champion when it was Oklahoma and they weren't, they were okay, but not great. Pac-12 champ in previous years, bad Big 10 teams. Last year, they brought in a 1-loss Ohio State team as opposed to a 2-loss Alabama team. So I could go on and on, but I'm just here to say, if I was a betting man, I do think Alabama gets in, but we'll find out over the next 12 hours. If you enjoyed this video, do me a quick favor, hit that little subscribe button. We'll be reacting in real time tomorrow to all the big news. Subscribe to this channel. And of course, new episodes of the Aaron Torres podcast every Monday, Wednesday, Friday.